on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha Arjuna, is sure to reach me. Text 9. Kavim Purana Manusha Shashitaram Anoraniyam Sam Anusmaridyaha Sarvashadataram Achintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat. Translation. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and, being transcendental, is beyond this material nature. Text 10. Prayana kale manasa chalena bhakja yukto yoga balena chaiva bruvor maje pranam aveshya samyak satam param purusham upaiti divyam. One who, at the time of death, fixes his life air between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 11. Yad aksharam veda vido vadanti vishanti yad yatayo vitaragaha yad ichanto brahmacharyam charanti tate padam sangrahena pravekshe. Persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkar and who are great sages in their announced order enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Text 12. Sarvadwarani samyamya mano kredi narudayacha murdinya dayata Dayat Manaha Pranam Ashtito Yoga Dharanam. Text 12. The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga. 13. Om Ityeksha Kaksharam Brahma Vyaharan Mamanusmaran Ya Prayati Tyajan Sayati Paramam Gatim. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. Text 14. Ananya cheta satatam yo mam smarati nityashaha tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yoginaha. For one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pritha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. Text 15. Mamupecha punarjanma dukalayama shashvatam napnuvanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramam gataha. After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. Text 16. Abrahma bhuvana loka punar arvartin arjuna mamupecha tu konteya punar janma navidyate. Text 17. Sahasra yuga paryantam. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. 17. Sahasra yuga paryantam aharyad brahmano viduhu yatrim yuga sahasrantam teho yatratra vido janaha. By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together is the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. That's 11 verses. Okay. So we'll go back to text 7. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anushmata yujyacha maya arpita mano buddhir mame vaishyasya samshayaha. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. Purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Charanadavindam Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This instruction to Arjuna is very important for all men engaged in material activities. The Lord does not say that one should give up his prescribed duties or engagements. One can continue them and at the same time think of Krishna by chanting Hare Krishna. This will free one from material contamination and engage the mind and intelligence in Krishna. By chanting Krishna's names, one will be transferred to the supreme planet, Krishna Loka, without a doubt. So we hear from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that we should think of Him. We should think of Him always. And it's kind of this is an answer to, what we should do, how we should perform our devotional service. We do our prescribed duty, but at the same time we think of Krishna. And Prabhupada again and again in his purports in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita stresses this point that you don't have to give up what you're currently doing. You just have to add Krishna. And the way that we add Krishna is by chanting His names. So Prabhupada's saying that if we chant His names, we will be free from contamination. And in that way, we get rid of the contamination, those thoughts that are always coming up, those samskars and conditioning that we've developed over this life and many other lives. We can be freed of by chanting His names. And so I asked His Holiness Danivar Goswami about this prescribed duty, because we were reading in, I think, the teachings of Kapila, that I was asking about these prescribed duties. What are the prescribed duties of a devotee? Because there's many, everybody has their prescribed duties. How do I figure out what my prescribed duty is? And then, if I could remember correctly, he said that since you're a devotee, the prescribed duties are devotional service. And who's in charge of assigning those prescribed duties? It's the spiritual master. So we understand what our prescribed duties are from the spiritual master, and he's the one who gives us knowledge about how to execute those duties. And also we understand more about those prescribed duties from other sadhus too, and our temple president or the devotee who's managing at the time. We can trust them to assign prescribed duties that are best in our favor. They might see that we have some propensity for something, if it's, specifically in the temple, if it's book distribution or repairing something in the temple or taking care of the deities. There's so many services that we have access to here at Rupanuga Vedic College, but then also outside the temple for those who don't live in the temple. Your prescribed duties might be taking care of your children, making sure they have, love, care, and affection, because if you don't give your child love, care, and affection, they're not going to develop nicely. They're not going to have this loving mood, because, we're trying to develop the loving mood among ourselves as devotees too. We might not be able to have that loving relationship immediately with Krishna like we can with the peers around us, but we can attempt to develop that loving mood amongst ourselves. And so we get, instructions about this from the Gita, in chapter 12, I believe it's describing like the qualities of a devotee. Or maybe I'm thinking chapter 13. Anyway, yeah, let me just go there so I don't want to misquote it. So yeah, I don't remember. Anybody remember out there the qualities of a devotee that are said in the Gita? 14 maybe? Yeah. Oh wait, it's 8 through 12. That's right, chapter 13. Chapter 13, 8 through 12. Yeah. Humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, and self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification. And so these are some of the qualities of a devotee. And a devotee practices these to the best of his ability. And then we also get further instruction in the Upadeshamrita, or the nectar of instruction from Rupa Goswami, how we can associate with devotees. We have, giving and receiving gifts, inquiring confidentially, and receiving, or the opposite of that, the inverse of that, hearing confidentially from a devotee. And then giving and receiving prasadam. So there's unlimited options within those 6 loving exchanges. It's not so straightforward all the time. Prabhupada explains that in his purport to that verse, that it could mean giving someone spiritual knowledge could be like a form of that loving exchange, not necessarily that you're revealing your mind in confidence to someone about some really personal subject matter. It's even more wide open than that. Of course, that's important too, and we can learn how to interact with Krishna also, because Krishna is a person. So we might not be able to have that full realization with the devotees around us because, like I can speak for myself, I'm not a pure devotee, so I have to try my best to understand how to properly do that. And so, our seniors, we can look towards them to understand how to properly do that, because they've, hopefully in their time of chanting, have become more purified and are further up in the process of devotional service. They might be free of most of the anarthas. And so we can kind of take lead from them. Anyway, is there any questions on this first verse? Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. Some really nice points you were making. On the point you made about chapter 13, text 8 through 12, you were talking about developing loving exchanges with devotees, which is very important. But unfortunately, due to our conditioning, what we may think is a loving exchange or something loving is nothing but lust. So when Srila Prabhupada is going through the qualities of a devotee, he doesn't really point out some of the external loving, what we would think is loving. You know what I mean? Externally, something might not appear to be loving, even though the devotee is, being very loving towards somebody. So maybe you could speak on this, or maybe you could elaborate a bit, if you can, on how, there's a big difference between, our so-called material viewpoint of love and actual love that a devotee can actually show.
So I was thinking when you were talking about chastisement, chastisement might not seem like something that's loving that's happening at first. It's kind of like, we're in a diseased state, and so these chastisements might seem very bitter in the beginning, but actually it's, nectar. So in that way, we can kind of, we have to push past what the mind is telling us at the time, or our mind just might be, unsteady about it. I definitely have personal experience of being chastised and like having an unsteady mind for like the next week, or maybe like a month, and then don't get over it and then I look back at it now and understand how important that was at that time for me. To develop that humility. So maybe on the point of non-violence, Prabhupada described non-violence as not necessarily like, not committing a violent act against someone, but actually like informing them about Krishna consciousness. Because in that way they can become non-violent. They can offer everything to Krishna and live a sinless life from that, and in that way they're not committing violence. So yeah, some of these, like renunciation of the objects of sense gratification. These objects of sense gratification can pollute our relationships if we want to take part in them. They, especially like in marriages, you have to treat your partner not as an object of sense gratification, but as someone you love, and a way to love them is by sharing with them Krishna and keeping Krishna in the center. Of course, yeah, and with devotees, with the individual devotees too, keeping Krishna in the center of our discussions. Of course, we need to reveal our minds in confidence, and within that's also Krishna. But there is these objects of sense gratification that still get in the way, and so understanding over time what those are, they'll be revealed to you. And so in that time we can have knowledge about them, and then eventually we can not artificially renounce them, but they will fall away, especially with our chanting. And then this pridelessness is a big one. Sometimes we might think we're better than one devotee or another, or we might be disturbed by some devotee doing something, and we're like, why are they doing that? But in that way we have tolerance. And so a lot of these might not, like someone being tolerant is not necessarily revealed in the moment, but in the future it can be revealed when you understand maybe how much they were actually tolerating you. Like, for perfect example of this is Srila Prabhupada. He had to tolerate so much in the beginning of his days. He had to wait in line to go to the bathroom, which is pretty incredible that he would just wait behind some of his disciples, and they wouldn't give him entrance automatically. Of course, I don't know what I would do in that moment. I mean, if I knew who Srila Prabhupada was, of course you would act, but if you're in ignorance, then you don't know. And so if you're in ignorance at that time, but later you realize how tolerant that was, then you can come to appreciate that more. So those are just some few examples I'm thinking of now. There's day-to-day things that happen, though. And as we more fine-tune our consciousness and through our chanting, those things are revealed more quickly. Like we might have some interaction with another devotee, and then like a couple minutes later or a minute later, we're like, oh man, I was not giving that devotee my time. My body language didn't demonstrate that. I wasn't standing straight in front of them. I was kind of like walking away and talking. There's so many different things that we can do to improve those interactions with devotees. But we be understanding about, sometimes the lack of capabilities that some devotees have versus others, and we tolerate that because we know they're trying. They're chanting Hare Krishna, and we can tolerate them in that way. It's hard to know also when something shouldn't be tolerated. So of course we have our superiors who we can trust, and they can help us understand, is this situation tolerable or is this intolerable based on their experience. Yeah. Another question?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
If it's all right, I really liked your answer to his question, but I'd like to add just a little more, if that's okay.
Please.
You mentioned, putting Krishna in the center. And there's this simple definition that I've heard many times from devotees, quoting from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And I don't remember which verse, but some devotees here might. And lust is defined as, doing things for our sense gratification, for our pleasure. But love, like real love, is doing things for Krishna's pleasure. So some thoughts I had on his question was just, really like all of us are so sensitive, and so we can sense like when someone's approaching us in such a way that is caring, or a really loving, like, oh, I want this devotee to advance. So I will chastise them, but at the same time, I'll give them, I'll offer them something so they can grow. So I think that if we're coming onto others harshly, that can be maybe taken, and without, some spiritual guidance, I think that could be taken as, maybe selfish and violent. But if we come towards another devotee and chastise them, like, your granola is burnt, this has happened. Your granola is burnt, but hey, here's a recipe that I know works. Give it a try. So that's like some loving chastisement, some loving exchange. That was just something that came to my mind as you were speaking. So, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thanks. It's okay to get fried out too. It's a learning experience. Hopefully we won't get fried out the next time. You had something, Dr. Fred? Thank you for your comments, by the way. That was very nice.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances, and thanks for speaking so extensively. I was wondering, for someone, again, like myself, who's uninitiated, who's aspiring to be initiated, my prescribed duties right now seem to be obviously follow the 4 regulative principles and chant 16 rounds minimum, and then follow the authority ahead of me. But like, what are those like prescribed duties for someone that's like such a neophyte? They're simply just interested in Krishna consciousness, What are those prescribed duties like? And then also couple that with what both Prabhu and Mataji were saying is that some of us in our neophyte stages, like myself, are overtly sensitive and full of such ego that, like, if someone comes and they say, "Oh, you have burnt oats. Here's a better oat recipe," to me, that is hard for me to actually realize that that's a loving exchange, even though it is, because that person is preparing you for better service. But like, in some way, when we know someone is very, very sensitive, how do we like think that we can put ourselves in a position to even chastise them if we're not the authority directly above them? So my question is, how does a neophyte take shelter of authority, and how does a neophyte not be so overtly sensitive to someone that isn't their authority, that is just trying to assist them?
So the first question is, how do we know who to accept, what are our prescribed duties, basically, from the authority, how to understand that? Yeah, at these beginning stages, we just take what we're given, basically. And those things we're doing, they won't always be the service that we're going to be doing forever. I was part of the Bhakti program here, and Radhastali and I, we washed dishes and went on Harinam and did the whole program, and then our services changed. But sometimes we need to there's also the needs of the temple and so on that could cause us disturbances. Like, this isn't the service I want to do, But we tolerate, that's trying to learn some tolerance. For example, like washing the dishes, it's like a perfect time to listen to lectures. And also dive into some conversation with the person you're washing dishes with too. I mean, it's up to the devotees who are doing it. I mean, many times I've talked with Magadari about certain topics, and he gave me a lot of clarity on those things when we were washing dishes. And so, we might not appreciate that service that we're given in the moment, but in time we'll recognize the nectar that it actually gave us. Hindsight's 20/20, especially with this devotional service. We can see how it's training us to appreciate the different services. I've heard from devotees that with these, quote unquote, menial tasks like washing dishes or sweeping or something, the topmost devotees, they relish these tasks because sometimes the positions that they're put in are very stressful. And so they just, they can just absorb themselves so easily in washing dishes. And we saw how ecstatic, I've heard how ecstatic Lord Chaitanya became when he was cleaning the temple, the Gundicha temple cleansing. He was so ecstatic. And that was just, not just, but that was cleaning the temple. So these little tasks that might not seem to have so much value at the moment, we can try to relish them, and we can tolerate them. And, luckily, a lot of the times our authority here, they like to plan it out in time. So, you wash dishes for a certain amount of time. Service. But we have to learn to tolerate. That's a big thing. And then the question of who to accept chastisement from, right? Was that your second question?
I guess I'll reword it and say, how do I personally endeavor to become more tolerant in general, especially because I know everyone here is elevated above me, and everyone here is nicely doing their service. So I guess more I should change my question into how do I put myself in a position so that they don't have to tolerate me, so I'm not such a burden on them, so that it can be a better scenario for them. Because it seems that if everyone is nicely gelling, then everyone is tolerating each other. Because I know none of us are, or that I'm not perfect, so it's not easy to be around me. And sometimes everyone's easy to be around, but sometimes there's just, like we're in this devotional adventure, there's moods that just come up out of nowhere through the different times. And
Yeah.
I don't want to take shelter of the mind, and obviously we can take shelter of the holy name, but sometimes you think you can take shelter of a devotee, but sometimes a devotee might not be in a mood for you to take shelter of. So how do you
Let's answer your first question because you're going into more. No, it's okay. So one thought I was thinking is, these growing pains are inevitable. It's unavoidable. These things we run into, but this is part of the process, because Krishna's testing us in a way. He's saying, can he handle this? Can he handle that? How much more can I give him? And if we're not facing those issues, those growing pains with other devotees and with our own mind, we're not growing. Sometimes these things come back too. So we just, we have to learn to let them pass by the mind. These things remain equipoised. And to tolerate the devotees more, we can learn in the third verse in the Shikshastakam. Trinadapi sunichena taropi saheshnina aminina manadena kirtaniya sadhadiri. And so, that one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly if he thinks himself lower than the straw on the street, more tolerant than a tree, and devoid of all sense of false prestige. And in that way, he can chant the holy names of the Lord constantly. Because if you think about it, the only thing that's stopping us from chanting the names of the Lord constantly is ourselves, is our own mind. But if we can just offer that prayer up to the Lord, I want to become more humble, I want to become more tolerant. And the more we tolerate, the more others might tolerate us too. So that's another thought. Thanks for your questions.
Hare Krishna. Personally, I hope that I hope I'm viewed as tolerant enough to take chastisement. Because I would hate for someone to think, well, that person's not very tolerant. He can't take any chastisement. Because when I become more tolerant, hopefully through some chastisement, and things like that. And just a small music analogy. Sometimes the person I played music with a lot for work maybe skips over some things in my songs that I was hoping he could get or something. And so I tolerate it for a long time. But then eventually, I feel like if I want this thing to grow, I've got to at least let him know what I'm thinking a little bit. And I think he would want, I hope he, knows where I'm coming from, but what do you think about, hopefully being tolerant enough to take chastisement and hopefully being seen as tolerant, or thinking, do we become more tolerant through chastisement?
That's an amazing prayer, I think. Lord, please give me the ability to become tolerant enough and to be seen to take chastisement. And immediately I thought of our gurus, our Gurudev, please have him see me as someone who can take instruction. Because that's what he's there for. And we've heard from other devotees' experiences, and I've also heard from other gurus talking about their experiences with their disciples, is like, they definitely go from individual to individual about who can I give the sauce to, and they can still take it and continue chanting Hare Krishna. Because that's the most important thing, is for us to continue to chant Hare Krishna. And they know that. They don't want us to go away. They want us to stay and keep chanting. And, we can trust, Lord, please help me trust my spiritual master. Help me trust those around me, that I know that they know what I need, especially with their spiritual master. And we're so fortunate here to have intimate association with a lot of us, our disciples of His Holiness Dhanavir Goswami, so we have the opportunity to associate with him. Yeah, that's one of my fears too. So I'm going to try to have that prayer also. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare
Krishna. This topic of tolerance, it excites me because I really want tolerance. And I've asked, there was one lecture that we attended in San Diego, and Vijay Das was giving the class. And he was speaking about tolerance, and so I asked him, I said, well, how does one gain tolerance? And he said, we could read about those who are tolerant, including Srila Prabhupada, our acharyas. We can read about our Gurudevs, like, we have His Divine Grace about Dhanavir Maharaj. So, yeah, just hearing about those who are tolerant can help us develop that quality, and other qualities as well, other devotional qualities. We can learn from the Srimad Bhagavatam so much about forgiveness and tolerance. Like, there's so constantly, like, we're hearing, at least, in the fourth canto, that's where I'm at now, we're hearing so much about offenses, and, how pure devotees are responding. And, even now in the first canto, we're hearing about how does a pure devotee respond to an offense or a curse. So we're given these examples, and so we can try our best to learn from those examples. That was a thought I had. And one more thing, if that's okay. Yeah, and just like living amongst devotees, it's as a Mataji here, I'm not going to reveal my mind to everyone, but as a brahmacharis, you all living so closely together, I think it definitely helps to take time to think through what you're experiencing, what am I feeling, what do I need, and try not to blame others for how we feel, and then take time to reveal our minds in confidence, because that's a loving exchange. So we can say, like, hey, I'm feeling this way, I want to serve you, but I'm missing this reciprocation, do you need space? Do you need something from me? I don't know, just communication. It's so important, and it's hard. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thanks for your comments. Yeah, the point about like learning from tolerance from others, we have Shamaka Rishi we're reading about, and then we also have like Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva tolerated Daksha in his, he eventually got his head cut off, but he tolerated him in so many ways. One thing leads to another with that pastime, but initially he did tolerate him. Did you have a comment, Prabhu? Or a question?
Yeah, kind of. Basically, I kind of struggle with this thing. We all struggle with it, actually. But, my whole life I've always believed in God, and I always saw how things were arranged, But I always knew Krishna. Here's pictures of Krishna all over the house. But I never could quite connect the two. That the Supreme Being who's actually making all these arrangements for all the living entities is actually that person. I always got this feeling like I can't see it. It's like very impersonal. And in other words, my relationship with God has always been very impersonal. And I was wondering how to actually cross beyond that threshold so that I can see, oh yes, this is Krishna. And he is that beautiful. And he is that kind and compassionate. And it's not just some impersonal mind or intelligence who's, something beyond my, beyond having a relationship with, kind of acting in ways that are mysterious and unknown, unseen, unmanifest. Yeah.
We have there's so many stories about Krishna, so getting to know him better, it's like something that comes to mind, hearing about his pastimes in many different ways. I mean, we have so many pastimes, Chaitanya Leela, we have Krishna Leela. So getting to know him, his personality, what he likes, could help us to understand, because like an impersonal God doesn't have these things. So the personal God, you can understand, he likes this type of preparation, and trusting the other acharyas that they, in their realizations about what Krishna likes, so that's one thing I thought of. But at first, we have to follow Vaidhi Bhakti. There's part of that is, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Bandhanam, Padasevanam. So many 9 processes of devotional service, 9 different things we can do to deepen that relationship with Krishna. Yeah, that's some of my thoughts. Did you have something else?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. That's a nice answer. I had just realization. I was at the mall with Rishi doing books, and like my water bottle broke, and I hadn't had water that whole day, and I was super thirsty. And it's exhausting, like doing all that. So you're really thirsty. And at the end of the day, we got to the car, and there was like right in front of the car, there was just like a big bottle of unopened iced tea. And it was like really nice looking. But we looked, and it was black tea, so it had caffeine, and we couldn't take it. Anyway, so I just thought that was like, there's so many examples that Krishna is very humorous. You can see these things in the world too, but you can't see them if you don't understand his personality, which I don't. I don't read enough. I don't do these things. So thank you for the encouragement.
That would have left you more dehydrated anyway. Caffeine runs through you. And there's that story of how a Brahmin was very starving, and he went to a neighbor that had food, but this food was not fit for Brahmanas to eat. And so he didn't have anything, so he went and begged for him, for actually it was a small morsel of some type of flesh. And so he took it, but it did not satisfy him at all. So he was just left dirty and cast out now because of his choice to do that. So sometimes, I understand that story. Sometimes if we wait and we're just patient, a little patient, that's utsaha nishchayat daryat. That's actually a great verse to bring up, the things that are favorable to devotional service, Usayat nishchayat daryat tat karma pravartanat. Sangatyag shato vrite. So being enthusiastic, patient, confident, following the regulations of bhakti. But in this way, Rupa Goswami is saying, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, and Prabhupada in the purport goes through the whole 9 processes. And then avoiding association with worldly minded non-devotees. And then taking instruction from the acharyas. So those things are favorable to developing our relationship with Krishna. To understand that he's a person. Especially when we're around devotees. Yeah. Thanks for all your questions. I think we'll end here. It's time. Srimad Bhagavad Gita.